Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The Grand Hall of the United Human Empire was silent as the Druid delegation arrived. Their armor gleamed under the golden lights, their sharp reptilian features hidden behind ceremonial masks. They were proud, tall, and cold in their expressions. At their center stood Princess VRA, wrapped in silver robes, her hands bound in golden chains, not as a prisoner but as a gift. King Roland sat on his throne, his piercing gaze studying the scene before him. He was a wise ruler, experienced in war and diplomacy alike. He knew why the Druid were here. They did not come to honor humanity. They came to rid themselves of a problem. The Druid High Minister stepped forward and bowed lightly, just enough to be polite. "Great King of humanity," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "we present to you a gesture of goodwill. Our Princess VRA of Housecorth. She shall be your people's bride, a symbol of unity between our species." Vel said nothing. She stood still, her violet eyes empty of emotion. She had been raised to obey. She knew her fate had been sealed the moment her father had declared her useless. King Roland's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of his throne. He was no fool. He knew the Druid were hiding something. "And why would the mighty Druid Empire offer one of their own to us?" Roland asked. His tone was polite, but there was steel beneath his words. The High Minister smiled. "For peace, of course. A new alliance, a future where our two species stand together." Roland's eyes narrowed. "Or a future where you send us your discarded blood and call it a gift." The hall tensed. The Druid warriors stiffened, their hands twitching near their weapons, but they dared not break the fragile peace. Vel's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what the king had meant. He knew. He had figured it out immediately. The truth was simple. VRA was infertile, or so the Druid believed. Among her own kind, she was worthless because she could not produce an heir. To keep up appearances, they had dressed up their shame and handed it to the humans. King Roland let the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of his doubt. Then he turned to the man standing at his right, a soldier in black armor, his face lined with scars from countless battles. Commander DNE? DNE was a hero of the war against the Druid. He had fought them, blood against them, and won. He was respected, feared, and trusted by the king. Roland looked at him. "What do you think?" Dan studied BRA, his sharp green eyes scanning her face, her posture, her silence. He saw no defiance, but neither did he see fear. She had accepted her fate long before stepping into this hall. Finally, he spoke. "She's not a soldier. She's not a spy. She's just a girl they didn't want." VRA flinched, the first real reaction she had shown since arriving. His words had cut deeper than he knew. Roland nodded slowly. Then he stood. "Very well," he said. "The United Human Empire accepts this gift." The Druid delegation bowed, satisfied with their deception. They turned and left without another word, eager to be rid of their shame. As the door shut behind them, silence fell once more. Vel lifted her gaze to King Roland, expecting a command, a new master, a cruel fate. But instead, the king turned to DNE and said, "She's your problem now." Dan raised a brow. "Mine? She's no use to me politically, but I also won't let her rot in a cell. She's yours to take care of. Do whatever you think is best." VRA blinked. Of all the outcomes she had imagined, this was not one of them. DNE exhaled, rubbing his temple. "All right," he muttered. "Come on, princess." She hesitated. "Or would you rather stay here?" Dan asked, voice edged with impatience. Valera shook her head quickly and followed. As they walked through the halls of the great human palace, a strange feeling stirred within her, something she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, she was free, or so she thought. VRA sat in the back of the transport vehicle, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The smooth hum of the engine filled the silence, but her thoughts were louder. She had been taken from one prison and placed into another. Only this one had no chains. Commander DNE sat across from her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken much since they left the palace. Vel stole a glance at him, trying to understand this human who now held control over her life. He was not like the warriors of her people. The Druid fought with cold precision, without emotion. But this man, there was something dangerous about him, something unpredictable. She had expected cruelty, perhaps anger, but so far there was only silence. Finally, DNE spoke. "You understand what's happening, right?" Vel lifted her gaze. "I have been given away," she said calmly. I belong to you now. DNE let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. You don't belong to anyone, he corrected. But you are my responsibility now. So let's get something straight. I'm not here to hurt you, and I'm not going to lock you up. But don't think for a second that means you're free to do whatever you want. Velera tilted her head slightly, studying him. What do you expect me to do? Dan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Live, eat, sleep. Try to find some purpose in your new life. Just don't cause trouble. VRA frowned. Purpose. The concept felt foreign to her. The Drur had already decided her purpose long ago, and then they had taken it away. What was she supposed to do now? The transport slowed, and BRA turned to look outside. The towering cityscape of the human capital had faded into rolling green hills and quiet settlements. The vehicle pulled into a large compound where buildings stood in perfect lines, soldiers moving in steady rhythm. Dan's home, she guessed. The doors slid open, and Dan stepped out. VRA followed, her silver roads catching the evening light. The air was different here, clean, full of scents she couldn't name. It was nothing like the cold, metallic halls of the Drur Empire. A tall woman approached, her uniform crisp, her brown eyes sharp. Sir, she greeted, nodding at Dan. Didn't expect you back so soon, and with her gaze flickered to VRA, curiosity flashing in her expression. Long story, Dan muttered. Vel, this is Captain Mara. She runs things when I'm away. Mara nodded. So this is the gift from the Drur, huh? Vel felt the weight of the woman's stare, but she kept her posture straight, showing no weakness. She's staying here, DNE said. Find her a room. Make sure she has what she needs. Mara raised a brow. You sure that's a good idea? No, Dan admitted, but we're doing it anyway. Mara smirked, then turned to VRA. Come on, princess. Let's get you settled. Vel followed Mara through the compound, her sharp eyes memorizing the layout. Soldiers trained in the distance, their voices strong, their movements quick. They were different from the Drur warriors, less rigid, but no less deadly. They entered a small building, and Mara pushed open a door. Inside was a simple room, bed, table, a window that overlooked the fields. It's not a palace, but it's yours, Mara said. Valera stepped inside, running a hand over the smooth wooden surface of the table. It was warm. Everything here felt warmer than the cold structures of her homeworld. You need anything? Mara asked. Vel hesitated. What am I supposed to do now? Mara leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. That's up to you, princess. No one's giving you orders here, not unless you ask for them. Valera swallowed. No orders. No commands. She had never felt so lost. The next few days passed in quiet routine. VRA wandered the compound, observing the humans. She watched them train, watched them laugh, watched them argue. They were strange creatures, so full of emotion, so different from the controlled existence she had known. DNE kept his distance, always busy with work, though she often caught him watching her from afar. He didn't trust her yet. She didn't blame him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Valera found herself sitting outside, staring at the sky. A tray of food sat beside her, untouched. She had no appetite. Not hungry. She turned to see Dan approaching, hands in his pockets. I am not used to your food, VRA admitted. It tastes different. DNE sat down beside her, stretching his legs out. Yeah, well, you'll adjust. A pause. The wind rustled through the trees. Why did you accept me? VRA asked suddenly. You did not want me. I saw it in your eyes. Dan exhaled. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe because it wasn't your fault. You didn't choose this. The morning sun was warm against Vel's skin as she stood in the training field. The air smelled of earth, metal, and sweat. Human soldiers moved around her, locked in drills, sparring with each other, their voices sharp with commands. She felt out of place here. DNE stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her with his usual unreadable expression. He had said he would teach her. She wasn't sure what exactly, but she was here. Ever held a weapon before? He asked. Vel hesitated. No. Dan raised a brow. Not even for defense. She shook her head. Drur females are not trained to fight. We are raised to serve or to be given away. Dan exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. Right, of course. BRA knew what he was thinking. The Drur saw females as too delicate for battle, as if their strength was only in birth-giving, and she had failed even at that. Dan turned, grabbed a wooden practice staff from the rack, and tossed it to her. VRA barely caught it, the weight surprising her. We start simple, Dan said. Balance, footwork. If you're going to live here, you need to know how to defend yourself. Vel held the staff awkwardly. It felt foreign in her hands. Dan circled her, eyes sharp. First, stand properly. Your stance is weak. Vel straightened. This is how we stand in court. We're not in court. DNE stepped closer, adjusting her posture. His touch firm but not harsh. Wider stance. Knees slightly bent, ready to move. VRA copied his movements, shifting her weight. It felt strange, but stable. Good, DNE said. Now grip the staff tighter, but not too tight. You need control, not stiffness. Velera adjusted. DNE nodded in approval. All right, princess, he said. Try to hit me. Vel blinked. What? DNE tapped his staff against his shoulder. Come on, attack me. I do not. You're not leaving this field until you try. Vel frowned. She did not like being ordered, but something in Dan's voice told her he wasn't mocking her. He was pushing her. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and swung the staff. DNE blocked it effortlessly. Too slow, he said. Again. She swung again, blocked, again, blocked. Vel's breath came faster. She tried to move quicker, to be unpredictable, but DNE saw everything. He blocked, dodged, redirected her strikes with ease. It was like fighting the wind. She swung harder, frustration rising. Dan sidestepped and hooked his staff behind her ankle. With one quick movement, BRA lost her balance and fell flat on her back. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She stared at the sky, stunned. Above her, Dan sighed. Lesson 1. Don't let anger control your movement. Valera sat up, rubbing her back. Her pride hurt more than her body. I was not angry. Dan smirked. Really? Because that last swing looked personal. Vel narrowed her eyes. You are insufferable. Dan chuckled and offered a hand. Vel hesitated before taking it. His grip was strong as he pulled her to her feet. Not bad for your first time, he admitted. You learn fast. Vel dusted off her robes. I will do better. Dan's smirk softened into something else. Respect, maybe. I believe you. For the first time, Vel felt a spark of something new. Not obedience. Not duty. Determination. That night, Vel sat on the steps outside her room, staring at the stars. Her muscles ached from training, but she welcomed the feeling. It was real. She heard footsteps and turned to see Mara approaching, holding 2 cups. Here, Mara said, handing one to VRA. VRA sniffed it. What is this? Tea, Mara said. Helps with sore muscles. Vel took a sip. It was warm, slightly bitter, but not unpleasant. You did well today, Mara said. Dan doesn't train just anyone. VRA looked down at the cup in her hands. Why is he helping me? Mara leaned back against the railing, gazing at the stars. Maybe because he sees something in you. VRA frowned. I am nothing special. Mara chuckled. That's what you think. Vel didn't understand, but for the first time in her life, she wanted to. She wanted to prove herself. She wanted to be more than what she was told to be. And tomorrow, she would train again. The morning air was crisp as VRA stepped onto the training field. The soreness from yesterday's session still clung to her muscles, but she ignored it. Pain was temporary. She had decided she would learn, no matter how difficult it was. Ian was already waiting, leaning against the wooden rack of training weapons. His usual smirk was absent today, replaced by a calm, focused expression. You're early, he noted. Velera nodded. I wish to be better. Ian studied her for a moment, then grabbed 2 staffs, tossing one to her. Good, he said. Then let's get started. They began with drills, simple movements repeated over and over. Footwork, balance, control. Dan circled her, watching every shift of her stance, correcting her form when necessary. Keep your weight balanced, he instructed. If you lean too much forward or backward, you'll be easy to knock down. Vel adjusted her stance. She was used to standing still, to moving gracefully in a royal court, but this was different. Here, movement meant survival. Strike again, DNE ordered. Vel swung the staff, her grip firm. DNE blocked effortlessly, but nodded in approval. Better. But don't just use your arms. Put your whole body into it. Vel tried again, this time shifting her weight with the swing. DNE blocked, but took a small step back. Good, he said. You're learning. The words sent a strange warmth through Vel's chest. She had never been praised for strength before. The druid never expected her to be strong. DNE moved suddenly, sweeping his staff low. The RA barely jumped in time, landing clumsily but avoiding the fall. DNE smirked. Not bad. VRA exhaled, tightening her grip on her weapon. Again. DNE chuckled. That's the spirit. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, the heat making sweat trickle down Belle's back. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she refused to stop. Enough for today, Dan finally said. VRA frowned. I can keep going. DNE shook his head. Pushing past exhaustion doesn't make you stronger. It makes you reckless. Belle hesitated, then slowly lowered her staff. She hated to admit it, but he was right. Her movements were getting sloppy. Here. Dan tossed her a bottle of water. Belle caught it awkwardly. She had seen humans drink this before, but her people had different ways of hydration. She copied what she had seen, opening the bottle and taking a sip. The cool liquid soothed her throat, and she drank more eagerly. Dan watched, amused. You act like you've never had water before. Not like this. The RA wiped her mouth. Dan smirked but said nothing. They sat in the shade, resting. The RA felt the weight of exhaustion, but also something else, satisfaction. You did well today, DNE said. The RA glanced at him. You are not saying that just to be kind. DNE scoffed. I don't waste time on false praise. If you were bad, I'd tell you. The RA let out a small breath, something almost like a laugh. DNE raised an eyebrow. Did you just? I did not, Vel interrupted quickly. DNE chuckled. All right, princess, whatever you say. Vel looked down at her hands. They were red from gripping the staff, but she did not mind. It felt earned. For the first time, she wasn't just a gift given away. She was something more, and she would keep going. Vel sat by the window of her room, staring at the vast human city beyond the castle walls. The lights shimmered like stars fallen into the earth. It was so different from the world she had known. Cold metal towers, endless deserts, and silent halls of the Drur Palace. Here, everything felt alive. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. The door creaked open, and Mara stepped in, her expression tense. You need to come, she said. Now. The RA frowned. What happened? Mara hesitated before answering. A message came from your people, your father. Vel's breath caught in her throat. The grand hall was silent as Vel stepped inside. At the center, King Roland stood by a large holographic projector, his hands resting on the table. DNE was there too, arms crossed, expression unreadable. As soon as Vidare entered, the image of her father flickered to life. A towering Drur figure cloaked in royal robes, his golden eyes burning with authority. Vigare. The king's voice was sharp, controlled, but filled with disappointment. Vel straightened. Father. You have dishonored our name, the king said coldly. You were given as a gift to secure peace. Instead, I hear reports that you train as a warrior, as if you are one of them. Vigare clenched her fists. I am learning to survive. You are a princess, the king snapped. Not a soldier. Not some savage. Beside her, DNE stiffened, but he said nothing. Velera took a slow breath. She had expected this. Her father saw strength in only one way, through power and control. But she had found another kind of strength here. I will not remain weak, she said firmly. The king's expression darkened. And what of the hair? A chill ran through Vel's spine. You were sent to bear a child that would unite our people, the king continued. Yet I hear nothing of an heir. Have you failed your duty? The words cut deep, but Vel did not flinch. The humans do not see me as a tool for breeding, she said. They respect me for who I am. The king's eyes flashed with anger. They have poisoned your mind. The RA lifted her chin. No, father. They have opened my eyes. Silence stretched between them. The king's anger simmered beneath the surface, but then his expression grew cold, calculating. If you refuse to fulfill your duty, he said, then I will have no use for you. The words felt like a blade to the chest. You would cast me aside. VRA whispered. You cast yourself aside the moment you rejected your purpose. The king's voice was emotionless. A Drur who does not serve the throne is nothing. Vel swallowed. Somewhere deep inside, she had always known this moment would come. I will not return, she said, voice steady. The king's golden eyes narrowed. Then you have made your choice. And with that, the hologram vanished. Silence hung in the room. VRA felt her hands shaking, but she forced them to still. A deep sigh broke the quiet. She turned to see Dan watching her, his expression softer than usual. Well, he said, that went about as bad as it could. Vel exhaled, feeling a strange mix of pain and relief. He has disowned me, she murmured. Dan shrugged. His loss. The RA looked at him, surprised. You do not think less of me. DNE scoffed. You think we care about your father's approval. We care about you. And from what I see, you're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Valera felt something stir in her chest, something warm, something new. For the first time in her life, she was free. But she also knew the real fight was only beginning. Vel stood on the balcony of the human palace, staring at the darkening sky. A cold wind carried the scent of rain, but she barely noticed. Her father's words still echoed in her mind. A Drur who does not serve the throne is nothing. She clenched her fists. She was not nothing. She had trained, she had learned, and she had made her choice. Yet a small part of her still ached, not for her father's approval, but for what she had lost. A voice interrupted her thoughts. You should be inside. Valera turned to see Dan leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. His usual smirk was missing. He looked serious. I needed air, she said. Dan stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. You're thinking about what your father said. Vigore looked away. He has turned his back on me. DNE was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good, now you don't have to worry about going back. Valera gave a small, humorless laugh. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Dan said. You're free now. No more expectations, no more royal duty. You get to decide your own fate. VRA hesitated. And if my people come for me? Dan's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready. The next morning, the tension in the palace grew worse. Human scouts had reported strange movements in the skies. Drur warships hovering beyond the borders, watching but not attacking. King Roland called a meeting. The war council gathered in the throne room, their voices filled with concern. This is a warning, said General Marlowe, a battle-hardened soldier. The Drur King is testing us. He wants us to know that he's watching. King Roland's expression was grim. He does not take insults lightly, and his daughter refusing to return. That is a direct challenge. Valera stood silently at the edge of the room, listening. She knew how her father worked. He never acted without purpose. If he was sending warships, it meant he was considering something far worse than mere warnings. He will demand I be returned, she said. And if you refuse, he will escalate. The room fell silent. Then Dan spoke. We're not handing you over. His voice was firm, final. King Roland nodded. Agreed. Vel is no longer a bargaining piece. If your father seeks war, we will stand our ground. Valera felt something tighten in her chest. The humans were willing to fight for her, not as a political tool, not as a symbol of peace, but as one of them. Still, she knew what her father was capable of. If my father comes, she said, he will not fight fairly. The next few days were spent preparing. The human soldiers fortified the palace defenses. Warships patrolled the skies, and scouts reported every movement from the Drur fleet. VRA did not stand idly by. She trained harder than ever, sparring with DNE, learning human battle strategies, and studying Drur weaknesses. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she and DNE stood on the castle walls, watching the distant glow of the Drur fleet. They'll come soon, VRA said. DNE nodded. Let them. We'll be ready. VRA turned to him. You believe we can win? Dan smirked. I believe in you. VRA felt warmth spread through her chest. She had been given as a gift, seen as a burden, and rejected by her own people. But now, standing among warriors who had accepted her, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a princess. She was a fighter, and she would never surrender. The night was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no movement, just an eerie stillness that wrapped around the palace like a warning. Vel stood on the battlements, gripping the cold stone as she stared at the distant sky. Then she saw them, glowing in the darkness. The Drur warships descended like silent shadows, their sleek black hulls reflecting the moonlight. There were dozens of them, moving in perfect formation. It was not a raid, it was an invasion. A loud horn blared through the city. Soldiers rushed to their positions, the once peaceful streets now filled with the sounds of boots on stone and weapons being drawn. Dan appeared beside Vel, his face tense but focused. They're coming in fast. Your father isn't wasting time. Vel took a steady breath. He never does. King Roland's voice rang out from the courtyard below. Man the defenses. Hold your ground. The human warriors were outnumbered, but they had something the Drur underestimated, determination. The sky lit up as the Drur ships opened fire. Blasts of energy rained down, striking the outer walls with a deafening explosion. The ground shook, and Valera had to steady herself as bits of stone crumbled away. "Archers, fire," a commander shouted. A rain of arrows, enhanced with explosive tips, shot toward the descending enemy soldiers. Some Drur warriors were struck mid-air, their bodies crashing onto the rooftops. But many more landed safely, their glowing blades slicing through the human defenses. Vel grabbed her weapon, a Drur staff she had modified to match human steel. She leaped down from the battlements, landing near the palace entrance where soldiers clashed in brutal combat. A Drur warrior spotted her. He hesitated for a second, his eyes widening in recognition. "Princess Vel?" Valera didn't wait. She struck first. Her staff met his blade with a sharp crack, and she pushed forward, forcing him back. The warrior faltered, clearly shocked by her strength. "You should not be fighting," he growled, locking another strike.